He who made the world was in the world and treated as a stranger. He came to his own, and his own never gave him welcome. Oh Jesus, you forget.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 of My Kingdom is Not of This World. What is an inquisition? It is an inquiry. What is heresy? Someone takes a part of the truth and develops his own theology, which is contrary to the truth. It comes from the Greek word for choice, which is a word we hear often in our secular culture, where it has been elevated to the level of a minor deity. Heresies have been around for as long as Christianity. Gnosticism was present in the 1st century AD and has persisted, for instance, through Marcionism, Manichaeism, Catharism and New Age spirituality. In the year 1209 AD, Cambridge University was founded. Like the great universities of Bologna, Paris, Oxford and Salamanca, it was a Catholic cathedral university, and all of them were at the forefront of great advances in learning across the spectrum of philosophy, theology, arts and sciences. At that time, Catholic Europe was under attack from Islam in the east and in Spain, and from pagans in the north and northeast. 5 years earlier, the Fourth Crusade produced the sack of Constantinople, which aggravated the schism between the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The church had become worldly. In 1209, Francis of Assisi went to Rome to ask for papal approval of his order. The Pope, Innocent III, had a dream of his church, San Giovanni in Laterano, crumbling. Holding it up was a little ragged man from Assisi. Francis received papal approval for his order, the Franciscans. Also in 1209, the Cathar Crusade began, following the murder the previous year of the papal legate Pierre de Castelnau, shortly after he had left Toulouse, where he had had a frosty meeting with Count Raymond VI. At that time, heresy was prominent. Cathars held power in much of southern France and northern Spain. Other groups, the Waldensians and Bogomils, were active in Italy and the Balkans. The Cathars were a threat to both the religious and the civil order. Author James Bogle speaks of them as an enemy within Christendom, even a terrorist force. He states that they persecuted and murdered Catholics, including missionaries. He is also convinced that Count Raymond VI of Toulouse and King Pedro II of Aragon were Cathars, even though they portrayed themselves as Catholics. Raymond was excommunicated, probably rightly so, in 1208 after the murder of the papal legate. The excommunication was lifted, but Raymond was excommunicated again when he did not fulfill the terms of his rehabilitation. Before the Crusade, Cistercian missionaries had been working for the conversion of the Cathars with very little success. St. Dominic of Guzman had begun his missionary efforts among the Cathars in 1206. He also made only little headway. Should the Crusade have been called, or should the tares and wheat continue to grow together? I refer you to Matthew 13, 24-43. The Crusader army was usually very small, with a regular turnover of fighting men. The key figure was Simon IV de Montfort, who had been on the Fourth Crusade and is one of a significant part of the force who left before the sack of Constantinople. He became the leader of the Cathar crusading force after the capture of Béziers and Carcassonne. He is given the governance, not ownership, of the captured territories. He met with considerable success, but was perturbed by the treachery and deceit of the southern nobles. To quote one source, the renunciation of loyalty by the southern counts never ceased to be a constant source of frustration for a man who abided by a strict code of honour. Béziers was taken in 1209, and the Cathar treatment of a captured crusader left little doubt that the rules of war would be disregarded. Béziers fell surprisingly easily. Buildings were set alight, apparently against orders. Reports of 20,000 massacred seem much exaggerated, as the population was much smaller than that. The story of a cleric saying, "Kill them all, God knows who is his own," has been proven to be a myth. In the year 1213, there was a significant battle at Muret. 700 knights under de Montfort defeated a vastly larger force under Pedro of Aragon and Raymond of Toulouse. One report indicates that St. Dominic and his companions were praying at a nearby church for the outcome of that battle. In 1218, Simon de Montfort was killed in a battle. The Crusades eventually ended in 1229, with French forces victorious. The crusade had become a war of conquest. What were the Cathar beliefs? They were agnostic. They had an inner elite, the perfecti, or perfect ones, who had the secret knowledge, and prayers were offered by them on behalf of the believers. This system was dualistic. They believed in two equal gods: the good God of the New Testament, who created the spiritual world, and the bad God of the Old Testament, sometimes called the Demiurge, who created the material world in which everything was evil, including marriage, procreation, and childbirth. Abortion, infanticide, suicide, euthanasia, and assisted suicide were practiced. They believed in predestination and in reincarnation, and vegetarianism was part of their ascetic lifestyle, especially for the perfecti. They claimed that John the Baptist was a demon, Jesus a bad man, with Mary Magdalene his concubine. They claimed that the spirit of the Saviour was present only in the body of St. Paul, that the Church of Rome was a den of thieves and the harlot of the Apocalypse. Does this sound familiar? The Cathars rejected the Catholic priesthood and the sacraments. They had one sacrament called the Consolamentum, which was received on becoming one of the perfecti, and also before death. If the believer then recited their altered version of the Our Father, they could supposedly go to heaven. They also rejected the doctrine of sin, which may explain the problem that Simon de Montfort had with the southern nobles. In the 1230s, the First Papal Inquisition was set up to deal with the Cathar heresy. The aims of the Inquisitions were fourfold. 1. To save souls. 2. To identify heresies and convert heretics. 3. To be a buffer between the accused and the executioner. And 4. To save lives. They had jurisdiction over Christians only, and had no power over life and death. That belonged to the civil authorities. It was a court and has formed the basis of our modern court system. Detailed records were kept. The accused were asked for a list of their mortal enemies. The accuser was not named the accused, but if he was on that list, then the case was dropped. The inquisitors were usually Dominican, some were Franciscan. They were chosen because they were highly educated, because of their good character, and because they were the least susceptible to any pressure from civil authorities. When inquisitors arrived in an area, they would give a month or so, a time of grace, for those who wished to be reconciled to the church to do so. Was torture used? Yes, though infrequently, and not as depicted in many cartoons that we have seen. It could be used when guilt seemed certain though unconfessed, and for a maximum of 15 minutes. Methods that could lead to bloodshed, mutilation, miscarriage or death were banned. Heretics who remained obdurate were referred, as required by law, to the civil tribunals. Note that at that time heresy was treason, and had been since the time of Constantine, and that not all who were found guilty were referred to the civil tribunals. If you want further information on Inquisition processes and penances of the medieval Inquisitions, Wikipedia gives a very good description. Contrast this with the example of King Philip IV of France, who reigned from 1285 to 1314, who, to meet his debts, taxed the church, then expelled the Jews and confiscated their assets. He then ordered 138 Knights Templar in his region to be arrested, and confessions of depravity, blasphemy and other falsities were obtained under extreme torture. He then pressured the Pope to dissolve the Templar order. At that time the popes were based in Avignon, and would be until 1376, when the exhortations of St. Catherine of Siena finally brought about the return of the papacy to Rome. Pope Clement V did yield to the pressure from the king, but came to realise that he had made a terrible mistake. However, the king had his way and probably got most of the Knights Templar assets. On March the 18th, 1314, the Templar leader Jacques de Molay and some of his men were burnt at the stake in Paris. De Molay asked to die, facing Notre Dame, with his hands tied in prayer. As the flames rose around him, he spoke out, saying, "God knows who is wrong and has sinned. Soon a calamity will befall those who have condemned us to death." Pope Clement V died in April, and King Philip IV in December, soon after his line died out. The Knights Templar continued as the Order of Christ and as the Supreme Order of Christ of the Holy See. The Freemasons, contrary to some claims, are not heirs to the Knights Templar. In 1484 the Spanish Inquisition was established. Spain had become largely united following the marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. Only the Caliphate of Granada remained under Muslim control, and in 1492 it returned to Spanish hands, so for the first time since 711 AD, Spain was wholly under Spanish rule. The Jews were expelled. The reasons given were the history of Jewish cooperation with the Muslims from the time of the invasion in 711, the Jewish practice of usury and its consequences, and the protection of the sizable community of conversos, that is, Jewish converts to Catholicism. In 1499 the Moors rebelled in Granada. Non-Catholic Moors were expelled after that rebellion was eventually quelled in 1502. Over the next 60 years there were 10 more attacks on Spanish soil by Muslims. Then, in 1568, Moriscos, that is the Moors who had supposedly converted to Catholicism, rebelled. This rebellion had significant support from outside of Spain and lasted for 3 years. Then in 1609 the Moriscos were expelled from Spain. How many Moriscos were expelled? One figure given is 300,000, but that figure has been questioned. How many Jews? Henry Kamen estimates that about 40,000 left Spain, out of a population of 80,000 Jews and 200,000 conversos. In the earlier part of the Spanish Inquisition, most of the cases heard were conversos. As time went on, mostly Moriscos were tried. How accurate are the portrayals of the Spanish Inquisition? Were 30,000 or 300,000 killed? Was there abuse or excessive zeal in the process of the Inquisition? Well, yes, there was. How often? I don't know. But in 1998 the records were opened and have been studied by various experts, including Henry Kamen and Professor Borromeo. 125,000 people faced the Spanish Inquisition. 1,250 died after being found guilty. The total death toll of all those tried by all the Inquisitions was about 10,000. In the year 2000, Pope John Paul II asked God for forgiveness for sins committed in the name of the faith, including by the Inquisitions. Did the Inquisitors achieve their aims? Certainly, they were a barrier between the accused and the executioners. Heresies were identified and many heretics converted. How many souls were saved? How many lives? We cannot know, but it seems probable that many were. Note that heresy has been treated as treason, as I said, from the 3rd or 4th century AD. The death penalty for treason remained in New Zealand until 1989 and in the UK till 1998. How about inquisitions in non-Catholic countries? In England, under King Henry VIII, an unknown number of Catholics were killed. Two estimates from non-Catholic sources, which cannot be reliably confirmed, are 50,000 and 74,000. Torture used was far more severe than permitted in the Inquisition. Punishments included being hung until nearly dead, then drawn and quartered. And as happened to St. Margaret Clitheroe, the patron saint of the Catholic Women's League, being crushed to death under unbearable weights. During England's short return to Catholicism under Queen Mary Tudor, 284 Protestants were killed over 6 years. Under Queen Elizabeth, one estimate of the number of British and Irish Catholics killed is over 8,000, although I cannot confirm this figure. I would like to return to the 13th century. Papal approval was given to the Franciscan order in 1209 and to the Dominicans in 1216. The Franciscan order grew rapidly and is still a major order. The order of preachers, that is the Dominicans, also grew rapidly. They placed high value on learning for both male and female orders, and a number of them were involved in tertiary education. St. Albert the Great stands out as one of the most learned, with an encyclopedic knowledge in all areas of education and learning. He taught that wisdom and understanding enhance one's faith in God. One of his students, Thomas Aquinas, was called a domox because of his size and quietness by his fellow students. However, St. Albert the Great said of him, "You call him a dumb ox, but in his teachings he will one day produce such a bellowing that it will be heard throughout the world." Thomas Aquinas, known as a great writer and philosopher, taught that truth is known through reason, rationality, that is natural revelation, and faith, divine revelation. At Mass on 6 December 1273, he experienced a prolonged ecstasy, after which he ceased writing, leaving his Summa Theologica unfinished. When asked by a friend why he was no longer writing, he said that, after what he had seen, all that he had written seemed as straw. On another occasion near the end of his life, and while he was praying before the crucifix, Jesus spoke to him. He said, "You have written well of me, Thomas. What reward would you have for your labour?" Thomas replied, "Nothing but you, Lord. Nothing